Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about why every true theologian is also an artist. But before we get into that, first be sure to like and subscribe this video and to this channel. So I just have an excuse to keep making these videos. Today I'm not in the forest, I'm actually in my at-home office in front of my wall of some of the books I've read and haven't read. So maybe this is a different scenery, but I like to get back out in nature when it's not a million degrees like it was in the last video and like 300% humidity. But today I want to talk about art. So before I was a pastor and started receiving my training in the theological, academic, religious studies setting, I actually was in art school, and I dropped out of art school. And specifically I was in for film. You would never know by these videos, these one-take and awful edits, but I was in for film. I love story, I love art, I love expression. And so I'm a little biased talking about this, but I think, you know, God calling me after being interested in the arts into being a pastor is no coincidence. In fact, what we see is that there is a long tradition of pastoring and artistic expression, and actually really more so being a theologian and also having an artistic endeavor. We don't even have to go that far back in history. Let us look at, you know, the world's current famous theologian, C.S. Lewis, wasn't just a popular writer on Christian things, but he was an author. He wrote sci-fi novels and obviously the Chronicles of Narnia, an amazing fantasy story, and helped Tolkien with, you know, kind of encouraged him with Lord of the Rings. But even beyond this, from the very beginning, Christianity has always been a place where artistic expression was at a very important setting. First of all, you know, the Christianity always thrives when it has a artistic kind of culture to it. You know, be it in like the iconography, like the Trinity here by Andrei Rublev, the famous Russian iconographer, or be it music. I think of, you know, or architecture. Think of like the Gothic medieval castles, or even like the Renaissance paintings. You know, there's something brilliant and beautiful about art, and I think, you know, and we see this also in kind of the mystics as well. Maybe not all of them, but many of them were also creative in some way, shape, or form, and not just the mystics, but many theologians. You know, you have Saint Ephrem the Syrian writing his kind of, you know, theological you know, views. He wrote them as hymns that were meant to be sung in a parish. And Saint Simeon the New Theologian, although not as good of a poet in many opinions, wrote hymns as well. And then Gregory the Theologian wrote poems. And so many more wrote these, found that it's so important to have an artistic expression happening in tangent with, or at least supplementing, their theological, pastoral, and priestly output. And we even see this, for instance, in, where is it? I don't know. Oh no, I don't have it on my desk. We can actually see, in my opinion, and this is a hot take, all the way back, I think we see this in, you know, Dionysian, Pseudo-Dionysius's ecclesiastical hierarchies. In it, he talks all about the symbols of ritual, and you get this impression that, you know, the symbol, you know, the symbol is supposed to bring a truth from God, from, you know, the top, and it condescends down. So essentially, you know, the hierarchy works is that the higher ups are, you know, in unison in a theosis, or at least a close to theosis type state, and are living in mystical theology, living in a mystical experience of God, and that through symbols and expressions and ritual, they then come down and then go out and show this to others. And we see this in communion and baptism, in the incense, which the Orthodox do. It was always amazing in my time in the Orthodox Church when the priest would come out. And there was this procession, and multiple times, but the great procession around the sanctuary, but multiple times he would come out and, shake incense at everybody. And, you do the sign of the cross and everything. This is, a dramatic telling of a message. And that is art. That is a creative expression. And so even the author who called himself Dionysius saw that inherent in this mystical expression of what God's activities are in man and what he is doing through the sacraments in us is this creative artistic expression. Now that's kind of, maybe a little bit of a stretch. I don't think Pseudo-Dionysius saw this as art per se. But Ephraim definitely saw this as art. Simeon saw it as art. The iconographers who, essentially paint theology in their works, in their paintings, saw it. It's important. The famous hymnographers, and even the hagiographers, the writers of the lives of the saints, saw that there had to be a creative expression of how these saints lived their lives. And and you even have individuals like Francis of Assisi, who, as G.K. Chesterton points out, wanted to be a French poet. And that's how essentially, we have the, brother sun and sister moon. I think I'm probably getting that wrong. It's been a long time since I've read that poem and that prayer. But why is this? Well, I think this is for two reasons. One is that God's a creator. God is an artist. From the very beginning, God's a creator. And from the very beginning, he sent man and woman to be creators in and of themselves. We are called the icon of God, the image bearer of God. Interestingly enough, the word that is used for us being made in God's image is only used in one other way throughout the Bible, which is used for the word idol. And an idol was an artistic expression of the god that they were worshiping, be it Asherah or Baal, whatever, Athena, whatever. The idol was an image of that god, and it was an artistic expression of that god. And so we are God's artistic expression here on earth. And then he told us to go and create more artistic expression through, first off, the naming of the animals, an artistic expression, but then to go and reproduce and create more image bearers of God, more icons, more idols of God. And so that's one. It's just in the core fabric of God's creative DNA to be a creator and to create things that create things and that enjoy creating things. So that's one. And number two, there is something about the act of creating that, first of all, gets a message out more clearly. It engages our emotions. It engages our heart, where theology oftentimes just engages our head by taking that theology and putting it into a creative endeavor. It can reach into the caverns of our heart in a way that, a stuffy library never could. But a poem absolutely could. This is why St. John of the Cross, his most famous works, The Dark Night, Spiritual Canticle, and the Spiritual Canticles, and The Living Flame of Love, I believe it's called, are all commentaries on poems he wrote. We forget that The Dark Night of the Soul was a poem, a very beautiful poem at that. And it was a poem that he wrote in order to be either sung or prayed, most likely. And the commentary was talking about the theological, spiritual, and practical implications that were being expressed in that poetry. So we understand, God more. We can actually partake in a mystical theology by interacting with God through others' creative expressions, and we can then tell the story of God's interaction with us when we interact, when we express creatively with others. And two, I think it engages in that's for like why it's good for everyone to engage in consuming religious art and religious creative expressions, but it's also important as a act of ministry. I think every pastor, every theologian needs to have a creative endeavor of some sort, whether it be writing poetry, painting, drawing, photography, whatever it may be, doodling, I don't care. It doesn't even have to be good, but they need to be doing some kind of spiritual creative expression, to get out of just this brain mindset, but actually begin into a contemplative, expressive thing. You'll be so surprised that switching our brains out of just the pure logic and reason, or even just the pure pastoral and relational, and turn it into the creative and expressive, and then you are and that intentionally is trying to convey a message through creative means. You'll be surprised the new ways you understand God, the new ways you can see a situation, and the new ways that you can learn to pray and express it. So like for instance, I have a few artistic expressions. Lately I've been into block print. It's really bad. I'll show you a couple. These are my two best, which is going to be really sad when you see it. But I've been doing block print versions of paintings and icons, and so this is probably my best one, of Christ, based off of the icon of Jesus in the Hagia Sophia. And then there's this one based off of a pretty famous painting of St. Francis. Wow, it looks really, really awful in this video, especially around there. But this is what I do, and these are just like tests. These aren't going to be the final product of it. But I purposely go out of that way, not just because it's a calming thing, but it's also meditative. I can pray during it. I'm trying to understand, what am I trying to express? What do I want others to see about Christ in this? And then since I'm using, other people's art as kind of a prototype, what were they trying to express in their renditions of it? And how can I theologically and spiritually bring people into the presence of God through creative output? And if you can do that with your hands, if you can do that with your writing, if you can do that with pictures, then you can do that with your words and in your preaching, and also in your pastoral care. Because you get to embrace the beauty of God that you would never know outside of a creative endeavor. Because creativity is all about love. What does art ultimately almost always come down to? It comes down to love. Either the ecstasy of love, or the loss or the sadness and depression that comes with the loss of love, or the loss of life. And so God's creating us, his first work of art, is an act of love. An act of creative love that then he said, go and creatively love more as you go. And so I think all pastors, all theologians, and anyone who wants to go on their own quest towards mystical theology need to, even if it's not very good, you saw a bad mind, where need to have some form of artistic expression on top of all the other things. You see me going out into the woods, and I love to pray during that. Don't just go out into the woods and pray on its own. That's silly. But maybe express what God is showing you in that, not just for yourself, but for others. And pray in that as well. We can find God in the forest. We can find God in the books. We can find God in the pen. We can find God in the ink and the paint. And that is I said this before, but if the role of the monk is a life of prayer, and the role of the mystic is a life of prayer that leads to divine invitation and union with God, then the role of art is to bring about, for both the monk and the mystic and the lay person who wants to also live these lives, to also prayerfully express in creative endeavors. And that we are joining in with a long-held, amazing tradition of beauty. And that's something that I think Protestants really don't get. With, I'm a mainline Protestant. We have white walls. Bare white walls. And there's a theology to that that's beautiful in many ways, but there's also something lost, a theology lost in many ways. And so I think it's important that we try to regain that expression. We try to regain that creative energy, that divine spirit that can only come when we force ourselves into a theologically creative space. And so that is today's video. We are all creatures of art, and we are all called to be creatures of creating art with our lives, with our families, but also with our hands and our work. So find a creative endeavor, stick with it, make it spiritual, make it about God, make it be prayerful, make it be theological, both in the mystical sense and in the logical sense. And ultimately have it tell the story of God's divine love, especially shown in Jesus Christ. So I hope this is a good message today. I hope maybe it gives you a little something to think about, something to work on. But don't just settle for it to be a prayer warrior. Be a poet. Be a painter. Be a photographer. Be a filmmaker. Be one who can express love, not just with language, but with the wavelengths of the heart that only comes with art. So go in the peace of Christ and rest in His loving fire, that it may motivate you and inspire you to do works of divine illumination. Go in peace.